George McPhee. Many know him as a longtime former player, longtime executive in the NHL with Washington, with the Canucks, with the New York Islanders, and most recently and currently the general manager of the Vegas Golden Knights. He was GM of the year this past season as the Vegas Golden Knights made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But to Brian Burke, he is a longtime friend, and Brian actually hired him as an intern when George was in law school, and I think George has been a landlord to a lot of Brian's kids. So here are George and Brian.
Okay, welcome. Nickname
Thanks, Burke-san.
Hobie-san. This is, everyone in hockey has a nickname. George is Hobie. He's a former Hobie Baker winner at Bowling Green. He studied automotive engineering, I think, when he was there. And then, so we got a lot of young professionals here, people that want to succeed in management in the sport. Tell us about your path.
Well, played at Bowling Green and then turned pro and bounced around for 7 years and then went to law school.
Where'd you go to law school?
At Rutgers. And then Burke and I met at the Hobie Baker banquet during my first year, I think it was. And so it's kind of interesting. I didn't know Brian, and there was a little bar that we went to after in the Decathlon Athletic Club that we went to, and I went up to get some drinks for the people I was sitting with, and Brian was there and stuck his hand out and said, "Hi, Brian Burke, how are you?" And we talked for a little bit, and I'll never forget what you said. You said, people that played the game should stay in the game, and I think it's great you're going to law school. Why don't you come and intern for me? And so he wrote my phone number down on a beer napkin, and I didn't know that I'd ever hear from him again, and he called 2 weeks later, offered the internship, and then every 3 months for the next 2 years, he'd call just to check in. And then when Brian was taking the Hartford job as president and GM of the Hartford Whalers, he said, "You should interview for this job, and I'll talk to Pat Quinn about you." And next thing you know, I had a job and been employed ever since.
So to give the time frame on this would have been in 92, 93, I left Vancouver assistant GM and went to Hartford. I was there for a year, and Pat Quinn interviewed George to take my job, and I was very proud and pleased of that you took over for me, and you guys went to the finals 2 years later, which was exciting. We never had that playoff success when I was there. What was that like, playing in the finals? You've done it twice now.
Yeah, there's nothing like it. It's you actually think you're going to win the Stanley Cup, and it's right there in front of you, and 10 days from the start of the series, you're going to either have the cup or not. And it hasn't happened yet, but been there 3 times, and hopefully next time it'll happen.
Sorry, Washington too. Sorry, 3 times. He played in the finals 3 times. So now, when I became a GM, I had 3 goals in mind. I wanted to win a Stanley Cup. I wanted to work for an original 6 team, and I wanted to do an expansion. I did not get to do the third one. It's an ultimate dream for a GM, I think, to take something and build it from the ground up. Talk about the process you went through. What was your first priority?
Well, first of all, I'll trade expansion for a cup if we want to do that. It's real simple. The first pillar in putting the organization together is, I think the franchise was awarded on a Wednesday. I sent my resume to Bill Foley on a Friday, and he called on Sunday, and then I went and met with him Tuesday, and the next weekend he offered me the job, and I explained to him what we can talk about here. And the first pillar is getting the right people. We wanted to hire the best human talent that was available for every position in the league or in the organization, and so that whoever you touched, if you're from the outside and touched anyone, contacted anyone in our organization, whether it's the equipment manager or someone in ticketing or one of our scouts, whatever, you had to dealing with a real pro and someone that was hardworking, low ego, and had some ability. That's the first pillar, and we spent a lot of time on trying to get the right people. Second pillar was culture, and it's an overused term, as you know, Berkey, but I consider it to be an invisible difference maker or the ultimate competitive advantage. The teams with the best culture prevail more often than not. And we were fortunate to have a culture to borrow from. Our owner graduated from West Point. We used their colors. We used one of their names. And we just wanted a higher standard with our organization, sort of a do-it-right culture. Wherever you are in this organization, you do it right. And we spent a lot of time on it with our staff, with our front office staff, with our scouts, with the rest of the organization, and with our players. And you know, Burke, what it's like you've done this, and I've done it, where you go to other organizations in sport, and whether it's Major League Baseball or the NFL, and you walk into their organization to spend a couple of days with them, and you know soon why they're winning or why they're losing or why they're about to win, how organized or unorganized they are, how they present themselves, who's hanging around the locker room, the clubhouse, you know, are people where they are supposed to be, so on. So we wanted to get it right, and I thought we did real well there. And then, you know, you go on from there, and then you put together your expansion process.
Okay, so step back. For the young people in the room, George and a lot of executives, I've done it for 30 years now, have not just wanted to be the best practice in hockey, but we study what the other sports do. I've gone to training camp with 6 different NFL teams, gone to spring training with 3 or 4 Major League Baseball teams, and then we had cross ownership of the Grizzlies in Vancouver, the Raptors here. So we've tried to study what the other leagues do and emulate their best practices, which is, I think, part of your success.
It is. You learn a lot, and you can share ideas. Actually, got some good ideas in scouting. And again, the Baltimore Ravens were coming off winning a Super Bowl, and spent time with them and sat in on their scouts meetings. It was really interesting. Spent time with the Redskins and learned all about salary cap in the year prior to our league coming up with the salary cap, and then Major League Baseball with the Nationals, and then we had the Wizards in Washington. So it's a really useful experience.
Okay, so to go back, your first pillar, hire the right people. Mind you, there's a whole bunch of people you could not talk to because they were under contract to other teams, and yet you still managed, by going outside the NHL, you brought in a couple of big names that worked in the CHL. You put your staff together one by one. Talk about that.
Yeah, we had a heck of a lot to do. I was hired on July 13th, and by our first meeting, which was right after Labor Day, we had hired 35 to 40 people, and that's a lot. We started from scratch, and I had certain models in mind for departments, but was open-minded on the way some people may want to do things. And some of the departments turned out to be a lot different than I anticipated, but in a good way. So we went and hired some outstanding people. And then, we had to, hire people that would help us during the expansion process. Software engineers to build us tools and platforms to work with, analytics people, and it's interesting. We can talk about later, I guess, if we start talking about the expansion draft. But
no, go ahead, skip ahead to that. The expansion draft. Now, you've done all this work. You've hired the people. You've done your lists. You should be in prison for some of the deals you made in connection with the expansion draft. Talk about that.
Well, we had 2 objectives. Was to build the best team we could right away and to get surplus draft picks. It was an exhausting process. We went through a lot of mock drafts, and we would apply our scouts' opinions, and we seemed to get better with every mock draft and being facile with the rules and with the players on those teams. And we had these really neat, as I said, tools that our software engineer put together, and I could click a button and it would change the matrix if a team was going with 3-8 or 3-7 or 4-4, so on. And then we would apply some analytics, and but you've got to be careful with that, because it's you learn that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that counts can be not everything can be counted.
Counts, yeah.
So we applied it, and then we got down to the actual process, and we had favorable rules, we had to hit it out of the park. Vegas needed to give that. They needed a chance as a market to embrace hockey, to be successful. I thought the league was really prescient in giving us good rules to work with, and we had to execute.
Okay, so let me interrupt you. Prior expansions came in 2 teams at a time. Protected list was usually, 12-6 or 12-5? So protect 12 forwards, 5 defensemen, 1 or 2 goaltenders. 2 teams picking off the bare bones that are left after that protected list. You came in alone. Vegas came in alone, and each team got to protect only 7, right?
Yeah, it was 3 and 7 or 4 and 4, whatever.
Depending on how many defensemen you protected, 7 or 8 players.
Yeah.
So you got the 9th best player at worst off every team in the National Hockey. You had to pick from every team.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about how that went, because you managed to extort, in a good way. You managed to go to teams and say, we're taking this guy unless you give us. So, for example, the Minnesota transaction. They wanted to protect Matt Dumba. They exposed him, but you took another player in return for a first-round pick and Alexander Tuch. Did I get that right?
Well, it was a little bit different than that. They were, we agreed that we would take Tuch, and we got Holla for a third-round pick.
Holla, that was it, yeah.
Yeah, and they played very well for us last year. They brought a lot of speed. The strategy going in was to, obviously be as prepared as we could be. I split up the teams with Kelly McCrimmon. I gave him 15 teams to work with all year long, and I took the other 15. I thought it was too many teams for one guy to handle. And then the thing I was worried about the most was a massive redistribution of players before the actual draft, that we would get to the end of the season and teams would look at their rosters and figure out how they could deal with another team, trade a veteran player. In Tampa did this. They traded Drouin and got Sergachev, and suddenly they didn't have any exposure issues. And we were trying, what we wanted to do was, there were some teams with cap exposure, there were some teams with player exposure. And so we split up the teams, we worked on it, and we wanted to somehow get in the way of this redistribution of players. And so we started doing sort of secret deals with teams. We thought there were 10 teams that we could talk to that had to do a deal with us. And 9 of them did a deal with us. But it wasn't disclosed to anybody. It was a conditional deal. We told them, if you do the deal with us, we will, it's a conditional deal. If you don't do anything else from now until after the expansion draft, our deal holds. If you do something, then our deal's off. And they kept it quiet. And it really had the effect of sort of freezing the market. Nothing happened. Tampa was the only trade that happened.
Oh, so you did a magical job on that, and you've totally screwed Seattle. When they come in, no one's going to make any deals. They're going to say, take whoever you want. We watched Vegas do it. We're not making side deals. So thank you for screwing them.
Well, we'll see what happens. But it was interesting because I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's a lot of tension and stress the few days leading up to the expansion window because we're waiting for all these things to happen, and they didn't happen. And then we woke up in the morning of expansion and said, wow, nothing happened.
Okay.
But then a different stress kicks in. You've got 72 hours to put this together.
Yeah. Now, because we don't have unlimited time here, you make your selections, you do a great job, you hit it out of the park, whatever cliche you want. You're ready to start the season, and then we have an unimaginable tragedy.
Yeah, and I've been too close to 2 of these now. One in Washington on 9/11, and then this one. I don't want to get political, but there's lots of things that should be done, I believe. But it's a devastating thing to go through. It's hard. We were actually very fortunate. We played at 5 o'clock that night, and in order for all of us to get home, when we pull out of the rink, we have to go right by Mandalay Bay on this narrow little road. If the game had been, it was the last preseason game, if the game had been played at 7, we might have been right in the middle of that. But anyway, we were suddenly on this huge platform for Vegas. We played on the road. the first two games. We won the first game, and I thought, geez, what do you know? We won our first game in Dallas. And then I started getting all these texts and everything else, and I realized then what it meant to Vegas. And then we won our next road game and then came home. And I remember saying, the only thing that matters is getting this ceremony right. We have to get it right. And it's not going to be about any exploitation. None of that. We have to do this right for this community. And we did it right. And I didn't care whether we won or lost that night. It's just about getting this right and, honoring and remembering the victims and honoring the first responders and the families and everything else. And, we had that 58 seconds of silence, and I swear that was the longest 58 seconds you'd ever want to experience.
You guys did a great job. That was magical to watch. You hit all the right chords. You honored all the right people. It was somber. But your team managed, without exploiting it in any way, your team managed to use it as a jumping off point.
There's no doubt about that. And that group culture can be an incredibly powerful thing. And that brought our team together like nothing else could. As much time as we spent on culture and everything else, nothing could bring a group together like that. And our guys did all kinds of things that people know about, and even more things that were done offline that nobody knows about, and they continue to do it.
So we've only got a couple minutes left. Just one quick comment. You've done what every expansion team should not do, which is raise expectations for continued success. But with the National Football League coming, I don't think you could have written a better script for your first year to have that much success and dig those roots down.
Well, there's tremendous civic pride in Las Vegas, initially about having their first Major League Pro team. But there's a bond now there because of what transpired last year that I don't think it will always be there. And it's something for Vegas. The residents of Vegas, it's 2.4 million people. Everybody knows about the 4 miles of strip. They don't know about the rest of the community. It's a beautiful place to live and work. The hockey team is for the residents of Vegas. The strip is for tourists. It's 45 million people a year come to Vegas for the strip. The residents of Vegas, the community, likes having their own pro team. It's for them. And we got a jump start on the other leagues. The other leagues are going to come, but we've got our stake in the ground, and we're doing very well.
So last question. 3 times you've been to the finals. What was it like? You couldn't have dreamed of playing in the finals last year. When you were doing your planning, not once did anyone on your staff say, hey, we might be good enough to go to the finals.
No, we wanted to be as good as we could be, and we'll see what happens. And I don't know how to explain how last year happened. We just, I didn't care about winning that first home game, as I mentioned. But then once the ceremony was over, I felt like, geez, now we have to win. And we scored a few goals, and the lid blew off the place. And it was like the first time this community could sort of exhale and celebrate after a week of a lot of darkness and sadness. And it just continued. And win a round, win a second round, win a third round, and geez, you're in the final against your former team, unfortunately. We almost won the Stanley Cup. Amazing.
Well, I have a feeling you've been there 3 times. I have a feeling you'll be back and you will get your ring. Thank you for joining us today. Good luck.
Thanks, Burke. Thanks for having me.